The slave market opened at night. We could hear the commotion downstairs where militants were registering and organizing. And when the men first entered the room, all the girls started screaming. It was like the scene of an explosion. We moaned as though wounded, doubling over and vomiting on the floor, but none of it stopped the militants. They paced around the room, staring at us while we screamed and begged. Those of us who knew Arabic begged in Arabic, and the girls who only knew Kurdish screamed as loud as they could, but the men reacted to our panic as if we were whining children, annoying but not worth acknowledging. They gravitated toward the most beautiful girls first, asking, "How old are you?" examining their hair and mouths. "They are virgins, right?" they asked a guard, who nodded and said, "Of course," like a shopkeeper taking pride in his product. Some girls told me they had been checked by a doctor to make sure they weren't lying about their virginity, while others, like me, only had been asked. A few insisted that, in fact, they are not virgins, that they were spoiled, thinking it would make them less desirable, but the militants could tell right away they were lying. "They are so young, and they are Yazidi," they said. "No Yazidi girl would have sex unless she was married." Now the militants touched us anywhere they wanted, running their hands over our breasts and legs as if we were animals. It was chaos while militants paced the room, scanning girls who had arrived when the market opened, chose a very young girl, which made some of the other militants laugh. "We knew you would pick her," they teased him. "Let me know when you were done with her. Give her to me." "Calm down," militants kept shouting at us. "Be quiet." But their orders had only made us scream louder. An older militant appeared in the doorway, a fat man with a huge belly called Haji Shakir, who turned out to be one of the leaders in Mosul. Haji is a common name and a title for a respected man. He had a girl in tow. She was wearing the niqab and abaya worn by all women in Islamic State towns. "This is Masabia," he said, pushing her farther into the room. "She is going to tell you how happy she is now that she is Muslim." The girl lifted up her niqab. Although she was frail, she was extremely beautiful, with smooth, dark skin, and when she opened her mouth, a small gold tooth glinted in the light. I thought she couldn't have been older than 16. She has been my Sabia since August 3rd, when we liberated Hardin from the infidels. Haji Shakir said, "Tell them how at peace you are, to be with me and no longer be a kafir," he said again to her, who remained quiet. "Tell them." She looked down at the carpet but didn't say anything. It looked like she couldn't physically speak. Quickly, the chaos of the market took over, and when I glanced back towards the door a moment later, the girl was gone. Haji Shakir, meanwhile, had approached another Sabia, a young girl I knew from Kocho. I lost all control. If it was inevitable that a militant would take me, I wouldn't make it easy for him. I howled and screamed, slapping away hands as they reached to grope me. Other girls were doing the same, curling their bodies into balls on the floor or throwing themselves across their sisters and friends to try to protect them. We were no longer scared that we would be beaten, and many of us, myself included, wondered whether we could provoke them into killing us. When a militant slapped me across the face and said, "This is the one who caused all the trouble yesterday," I was surprised by how little his hand hurt me. It was far more painful a moment later when he touched my breast. After he left, I collapsed on the floor where Nisreen and Catherine tried to comfort me. While I lay there, another militant stopped in front of us. I had my knees pulled to my forehead, and all I could see was his boots' calves, as thick as three tree trunks, sticking out of them. He was a high-ranking militant named Salwan, who had come with another girl, another young Yazidi from Hardin. Who he planned to drop off at the house while he shopped for her replacement. I peered up at him. He was the most enormous man I had ever seen, like a giant in a white dishdasha, as big as a tent, scowling behind a reddish beard. Nisreen, Royan, and Catherine draped their bodies over me, trying to hide me, but he didn't go away. "Stand up," he said. When I didn't, he kicked me. "You, the girl with the pink jacket," I said. "Stand up." We screamed and huddled together more tightly, but this just provoked Salwan even more. He leaned down and tried to pull us apart, clutching at our shoulders and arms. Still, we held on to one another as though we were one person. Our resistance made him furious, and he yelled at us to stand up, kicking at our shoulders and hands. Eventually, the struggle had gotten the attention of a guard, who came over to help, beating at our hands with a stick until the pain was so great that we had to let go of one another. After we were separated, Salwan loomed over me smirking, and I saw his face clearly for the first time. His eyes were sunk deep into the flesh of his wide face, which seemed to be nearly entirely covered in hair. He didn't look like a man. He looked like a monster. We couldn't resist anymore. I'll go with you, I said, but you have to take Catherine, Royan, and Nisreen as well. Nafa came over to see what was happening. When he saw me, his face turned red with anger. "It's you again," he shouted, and he slapped each of us across our faces. "I won't go without them," I screamed. And Nafa started hitting us faster and harder, hitting us until our faces went numb. Royan started bleeding from her mouth. Then when he and Salwan grabbed me and Rajian and tore us away from Catherine and Nisreen, dragging us downstairs. Salwan's footsteps sounded heavy on the staircase. I didn't say goodbye to Catherine or Nisreen, or even look behind as they took me away. Attacking Sinjar and taking girls to use as sex slaves wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was made on the battlefield by a greedy soldier. ISIS planned it all. How they would come into our homes, what made girls more or less valuable, which militants deserved the Sabiya as an incentive, and which should pay. They even discussed Sabiya in their glossy propaganda magazine, Dabiq, in an attempt to draw new recruits. From their centers in Syria and sleeper cells in Iraq, they mapped out the slave trade for months, determining what they thought was and was not legal under Islamic law, and they wrote it all down so that Islamic State members would follow the same brutal rules. Anyone can read it. The details of the plan for Sabiya are collected in a pamphlet issued by ISIS Research and Fatwa Department, and it is sickening, partly because of what it says and partly because of how ISIS says it. So matter of fact, like the law of any state, confident that what they are doing is sanctioned by the Quran. Sabiya can be given as gifts and sold at the whim of the owner, for they are merely property. The Islamic State pamphlet reads, women shouldn't be separated from their young children, which is why Demal and Adki were told to stay in Salah, but grown children like Malik can be taken from their mothers. These are rules. There are rules for what happens if Sabiya becomes pregnant. She cannot be sold, or if her owner dies, she is distributed as part of his estate. An owner can have sex with a prepubescent slave, it says, if she is fit for intercourse, and if she is not, then it is enough to enjoy her without intercourse. Much of it they support with verses from the Quran and medieval Islamic laws, which ISIS uses selectively and expects its followers to take literally. It is a horrible, stunning document, but ISIS is not as original as its members think it is. Rape has been used throughout history as a weapon of war. I never thought I would have something in common with women in Rwanda. Before all this, I didn't even know that a country called Rwanda exists, and now I am linked to them in the worst possible way. As a victim, a war crime that is so hard to talk about that no one in the world was prosecuted for committing it until just 16 years before ISIS came to Sinjar. On the lower floor, a militant was registering the transactions in a book, writing down our names and the names of militants who took us. Compared to upstairs, downstairs was orderly and calm. I sat down on a couch next to a few other girls, but Royan and I were too scared to talk to them. I thought about being taken by Salwan, how strong he looked and how easily he could crush me with his bare hands. No matter what he did and no matter how much I resisted, I would never be able to fight him off. He smelled of rotten eggs and cologne. I was looking at the floor, at the feet and the ankles of the militants and girls who walked by me. In a crowd, I saw a pair of men's sandals and ankles. They were skinny, almost womanly. And before I could think about what I was doing, I flung myself towards those feet. I started begging, "Please take me with you," I said. "Do whatever you want. I just can't go with this giant." It still amazes me the kind of decisions we all made, thinking it possible one choice would lead to torture while another would save us, not realizing that we were now in a world where all paths led to the same terrible place. I don't know why the thin guy agreed, but taking one look at me, he turned to Salwan and said, "She's mine." Salwan didn't argue. The skinny man was a judge in Mosul, and no one disobeyed him. I raised my head and almost felt like smiling at Salwan, thinking I had won. But then I felt him grab my hair and pull my head back violently. "He can have you now," Salwan said. "After a few days, you will be with me." And then he let my head fall forward. I followed the thin man to the desk. "What is your name?" he asked me. He spoke in a soft but unkind voice. "Nadia," I said, and he turned to the registrar. The man seemed to recognize the militant right away and began recording our information. He said our names as he wrote them down, Nadia Haji Salman. And when he spoke the name of my captor, I thought I heard his voice waver a bit, as if he were scared, and I wondered if I had made a big mistake.